Hello, my loves. I'm Ellie Frost. Thank you so much for being on my channel, where we are talking about the multi-dimensional approach to rapidly and radically healing and transforming during and after narcissistic abuse. And this video is about emotional neglect and narcissistic abuse, right? Which is a big one. And I think this is one that it's not necessarily always recognized, right? How damaging emotional neglect is, right? I mean, for a child not to be soothed by a parent, yeah, is actually like extremely distressing. I've talked before on the channel that it's scientifically proven that if a baby is given food and water but not actually held and loved in the first 2 weeks of its life, that baby often dies. It can be fatal, right? It's not necessarily fatal in the same way for us as adults, although it is extremely damaging, right? And can lead us to such a low level of feeling worthy, feeling loved, feeling safe in the world, right? So emotional neglect, let's talk about it and what it looks like. Emotional neglect, I mean, is as simple as abandoning someone in their emotions, yeah? Where they know that you're extremely upset and they just literally ignore your pain, right? They don't soothe you, they just walk away from you, or they try and I made a video on toxic positivity, completely gloss over it. I'll tell you how you should feel, Well, you should just be grateful. You should just be happy, right? A narcissist constantly tries to control you by your emotions, right? That's how they actually have control over you. They control your emotional responses, right? To life, to them, to everything. Love bombing is about emotionally hijacking you into the illusion and putting you on a nervous system, complete dysregulation of highs and lows, which later you may find, which a lot of people do, your body is constantly on that roller coaster without the stimulus of the narcissist. So even if you leave one, you can still be going through lots of ups and downs emotionally, right? So like you could be on a good, as soon as you feel things are steady and good, you're going to be anticipating impending doom, because a narcissist always puts you through stages, the abuse cycle of love bombing and then everything being torn down, right? So our nervous system gets used to that, and after a while it doesn't need the stimulus to produce it. It's just a nervous system response. So emotional neglect is like being aware of someone suffering and literally like neglecting to acknowledge it. Yeah. And if someone doesn't acknowledge you emotionally, it's giving your subconscious, which I talk about a lot, the subconscious program that you don't matter and you don't exist, because of course our whole reality is our emotional reality, right? So when we don't exist or and aren't validated on an emotional level, we actually start feeling like we don't matter and we don't really exist because we've got no self, right? So it's very, very damaging, potentially, unless you know what you're learning here. And I'm sure in other places where you're learning about what this is and actually how to heal. Yeah. So I talk on this channel about sometimes, us also recognizing where when we're very traumatized, we might sort of dump on people and people aren't dumping ground. So we've got to be aware of processing our own emotions and what's kind of appropriate and what's actually something ours to process. But when someone's like literally refusing to acknowledge that your emotions are important, refusing to validate them, and even worse, which happens a lot in narcissistic abuse, tormenting and antagonizing them, this is a form of abuse, and it can have, the severity of effects as any other kind of abuse, right? When we're constantly emotionally neglected, which is emotional abused, then we tend to just feel a very lack of safety, lack of love in the world, right? Because we're not safe to be ourselves, we're not safe to have emotions. We tend to adopt very unhealthy behaviors like, over the top people pleasing, over the top trying to be very malleable. And again, you're the best targets for narcissists are the people who are the most malleable, right? Who will actually bend over backwards to be what the narcissist needs them to be, right? So we get trained into these behaviors at the complete abandonment of ourselves, right? So the first thing to do is to come home, right? Which means self-soothe. Sometimes, as an adult, we have to literally just soothe ourselves. The inner child, literally just say, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, we've got to learn to parent ourselves in a way that we may never have been parented, but we've got to learn to self-soothe ourselves, because otherwise we're going to go into the world looking for often unhealthy people to try and soothe us, right? Because we don't know how to regulate our own nervous system. We haven't been taught this. And again, I teach it in my program and I teach it in private coaching, but like it's really, really important. Right? A lot of us are totally overwhelmed by our emotions and numbed out from them, because if we have been emotionally neglected, what we learn to do is detach from them. That's why when people say, you know, I feel disassociated a lot, well, what you are is numbed out. What you've done is numbed out, which is it's a survival mechanism. We just try and numb out from our emotions. You might turn to addictions, you might turn to you know, I mean, narcissistic abuse is an addiction, is an enmeshment, you know, to an unhealthy, toxic person. So, like, we turn to unhealthy things, right? Because we don't know how to self-soothe. And if we've been sort of suppressing and repressing our emotions for so long, then when we do feel them, we're very overwhelmed because we're not used to them in our body. We don't know it's safe to have emotions, and they have literally, we've been taught that it's not. We might have been punished for it. So many people tell me that a narcissist, I had this in my life, will tell them that you're too emotional. I mean, often when we're actually not at all. It's just that they don't, you know, you're not allowed to express any emotions. Why? Because then you'd get in touch with the truth, partly, and you'd process and heal. Because feeling our emotions and allowing them to run their course in our body is part of the healing process, right? And that's actually part of how we can resolve things, is actually just let it flow through us, but not get stuck in it, which is what I teach people. You know, when animals are scared, they shake. When babies are angry, they, you know, toddlers, they'll lie on the floor and thump their fist, but then it's over. They got it out their body, right? But when we've been taught to hold it in, hold it in, hold it in, we get stuck, right? We get stuck in our energy field, and actually we get very, very clogged up, and then we get dis-ease. Dis-ease can come from it. Right? Louise Hay did a lot of work, and many other people have done lots of work on linking particular emotional traumas to particular diseases, because emotions that aren't processed stay in the body, right? And that's what I teach you guys a lot. You can't outthink your trauma, yeah? Because you can't fix a feeling with a thinking. So we've got to actually start coming into safe spaces, and being safe with ourselves is a great safe space, right? Where we actually get to feel and express our emotions. It may even be on your own, right? I talked once about how I literally, when I was getting in touch with anger, which was an emotion I never had felt, really. I'd always bypassed anger because I didn't think it was acceptable. I never thought I was even capable. So I had to, as part of my healing, get in touch with anger, because it's absolutely appropriate to be angry, right? It's not appropriate to take that out on other people necessarily, right? And that's why a lot of us are scared of anger, especially men, I think, because anger is the only emotion that men are, you know, conventionally allowed to sort of feel in society. So, you know, getting in touch with it in a safe way meant for me, like walking or running and walking around a field, like swearing for like over an hour and a half when something really bad happened to me, because I had to get it out my body, right? But doing that was very cleansing. I sometimes listened to rap and started just, you know, getting in touch with the anger, because it wasn't appropriate that I wasn't feeling it. I was just numb to the anger. And anger is a very healthy emotion. Actually, if you look at Michael Hawkins does an emotional scale where you can see all emotions and like the vibrational quality, and anger is actually in the middle. You know, the lowest level emotions are like shame and guilt. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with any emotion. Some people say, well, you shouldn't be having low emotions because it's low vibe. That's not true. You're a human, right? And the quicker you process them, the more you'll bob up to a high vibe, right? But like trying to suppress them and judging them and not allowing your body to do what it needs to do, which is process them, just like it needs to process food and water, is actually getting in the way and keeping you stuck in it. So don't get stuck in a low emotion if you process it. But if you don't process it, it lives in you. And guess what? You're an energetic match to receive more things that make you angry until we actually let it out, right? So sometimes just going in the car and screaming is good for us. Right? Sometimes actually understanding that we've got a lot to be angry about sometimes, and that's safe to do. I've got particular things I use, tools I help people with, but at the end of the day, it's about processing it so you don't take it out on anyone else. That you can come and have like regulated conversations when you're neutral, but you can't do that when a lot of this stuff is built up in you. So we've got to kind of unclog the pipe so that the emotions can flow freer, and then our vibration naturally rises, right? So now look, emotional neglect, right? So when we've experienced this, it's hard for us to know sometimes what's appropriate and what's not. Just because you don't want to emotionally neglect someone else does not mean you let them dump on you either. When someone is draining you, when they're just like dumping on you, right? That doesn't feel good. And a lot of us that have been used to people pleasing and being the battery source for other people find that people try and just dump all their stuff on us, and it can be very dysregulating for us. That's not what this is about. And actually we get to say to people, I'm sorry, like, I can't help you with this. If you want to, because there's a difference between a conversation and someone just dumping everything on you, and often they're trauma bonding you. Often they'll bring up traumatic things that actually they just need to process on their own, right? So supporting someone is being willing to hold space for where they're at. Yeah, you can say to someone, yeah, I'm doing okay, I'm glad to see you, I'm going through something right now, I'm feeling quite sad about this. That's different to when you just literally dump on someone in a way that like is overwhelming to them, right? So you can ask permission, you can, if it's okay to talk about it. You can also, the more you do this processing on your own, the less you'll need to, or feel like you need to do it, because when we just dump our emotions on someone else, it does temporarily give us relief because we feel a sense of connection, but it still lives in us if we haven't processed it. So do you find that, like, often if you talk about it, then you feel better for a minute, but it's still there? That means the emotion's not processed. So we've got to learn to process. I've got great tools for this in Sovereign. Any questions on this, let me know. Lots of love. I'll speak to you soon.